All right, so I just wanted to start with a little bit about myself. Um, so right now I'm a medical student at U of T, University of Toronto. Um, con- Before this, I worked as a mental health nurse. I've been working as a mental health nurse since 2019, and the population I worked with was people who had conflict with the law. So if a person commits a crime, for instance, typically if a person with mental health issues commits a crime, there's an evaluation that is done to see if that person was mentally responsible for his crime, is criminally responsible. Because if you can understand what's going on, and even if you have a mental illness, as long as you can understand what's going on and you understood what you were doing was wrong, then you're responsible for your crime. But if you didn't understand what you're doing was wrong, then you're not responsible for your crime. So there's a difference in the way the justice system treats you. So if you're responsible for a crime, you go to jail. But in jail, there are still mental health supports that you get in jail. If you're not responsible for your crime, you go to what they call a forensic treatment unit. So there, it's not like jail. You can go out, you can earn your freedom over time, but there's still some restrictions there. You can walk, you can do things, but there are restrictions there. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing since 2019, and I've been in med school since last year. Apart from that, I run a mental health startup. It's called MHappy. MHappy is a chatbot that performs mental health assessments, and I'll tell you the story about it at the end. Okay, so 5 steps to improve your mental health. Um, First, I just want to say that many of the things I'm going to say, they're not new. They're things that you probably already know, you've probably heard before. So it's not necessarily something that is alien to you, it's things that you already know. However, it's not just about knowing these things, it's also about doing them. Myself, I'll tell you that I don't do many of the things that are here. So that's it. Many people know them, they know of them. We remind ourselves of them, but we also have to put the effort to do. But the good thing is that you don't have to be perfect. You know, lots of things improve your mental health if you do them. But there might be a recommended amount of it. We'll get to specifics as we talk a little bit. Might be a recommended amount of it. But even just starting to do it, you don't have to be perfect at it, just doing a little bit, it has tremendous impact on your mental health. And the beautiful thing is that there's like an S-shaped curve, so that you know if you do 10%, the benefit you get from doing 10%, is so high and so much. It's sharp. You have a sharp increase. And by the time you're doing 90%, 95%, the increase is not that much, but there's still increase. But the most increase you get is usually just starting and doing the first few steps. So that's what we should think about. So the first thing to do is to start by um, thinking about what mental health is, mental well-being, mental illness. These are different terms. When you talk of mental health, like we already talked about, is a general state of mind. Is it's a global term describing how you feel. Lots of people usually confuse it with mental illness. Because when you talk of Yaba left, so there's this hospital I know about in Abeokuta, and you have mental illness. You send people there. People often confuse mental health with mental
Yeah,
illness. Yeah, what were you saying?
no, no, no. I said arrow.
Yeah, Aru. Aru is the name. Yeah. So when they think of mental health, they think of those people. Um, yeah, and they are related, but they are not opposites. A lot of people, the word health and illness often seem opposite, but they are not opposite. It's possible to have a mental illness and still have good mental well-being. You can have a clinical diagnosis of schizophrenia or some other mental illness, and still be able to function, still be able to cope with stressors, still be able to be at peace, be happy, and live a good life. And it's possible to not have any diagnosis, to not have any clinical diagnosis of any serious or severe mental disease, and yet you can experience mental distress all the time. You are always anxious, you are always depressed, things are not going well for you, and you are unable to function, you're able to cope with your job, you're able to cope with school, you can experience mental distress without having a mental illness. However, they're connected in the fact that if you have cumulative, you're always having mental distress all the time, that trauma over time could cause you to have a mental illness. So there's a link between them, but they are not the same thing. So a person without a clinical diagnosis can experience mental distress. A person with mental illness can experience mental well-being. So mental well-being is the goal. It's a state of being comfortable, healthy, and happy, able to cope with the stressors in your day-to-day life, able to deal with situations as they rise, and they are not destructive to your sense of being. Mental distress is an unpleasant state. You're not able to adjust. You experience tragedy, you experience something bad, and it gets to you. So that you're unable to cope. I know that these definitions are vague, but most people can intuitively understand because you've experienced it before. You have felt it before. You know when things are going, when you feel okay, and you know when you are experiencing mental distress. So these are things that are experiential, and though the definitions are vague, we can, we feel them. We know what we're talking about. So the first tip that I give is to get involved in community. I'll send an infographic to the group after the talk. But this is the thing, and it's the paradox, is that when a person pursues happiness, you talk about the Declaration of Independence. It talks about how every man has a right, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everybody should be free to pursue their own happiness. But the paradox there is that if you are pursuing your happiness, people who actively pursue their own happiness are unlikely to find happiness. So I repeat it again. People who actively pursue their own happiness are unlikely to find happiness. If you think about yourself and you think about how, okay, I want to become more happy, doing things for myself, giving myself stuff, you're unlikely to find happiness. Happiness is often found in doing things to make other people happy. Studies show that people who are more altruistic, people who volunteer their time, who try to help other people, you see people suffering and you try to alleviate their suffering. There's a selfish benefit you get from helping other people get to their own happiness. Is that you find your own happiness improves. So that's the paradox there. So it's not by pursuing your own happiness. It's oftentimes looking around you and seeing how I can be helpful to other people. And in doing that, I get the benefit of happiness. And we can talk about ways you can be helpful. But typically, having a network of family and friends around you is really good. Your family is the first. Not everybody has great families, but if you have a great family, that's usually a very big thing, a big deal for your happiness. If you have good friends, if you're an introvert like me, I don't have a lot of friends, but that might be a little bit difficult. But it should be a priority for you to find a network of friends, a network of people who can collaborate with you and who care about you. And that's why social institutions exist in the first place. So if you're an introvert like me and you don't have any friends, there are ways that you can go about finding friends. And like I've talked about, is doing things to make people happy. And the best way to build this network, to find these friends, is to be involved in your community. Studies show that people who go to church every week or go to the mosque every week, people who have a consistent, religious participation, they tend to have better mental health outcomes. They tend to find happiness too. And the reason is this, that these religious activities are not only about the religious part of it, they are also social, in the sense that you go there and you meet people, you participate in activities with people together, and that is where people tend to find that network of people who support them. It's in participation in religious activities that they tend to find those people that that give them that supportive network, that if they fall, it's like a safety net. If they fall, there are people there to catch them. So if you're not religious, you have to find something else. I don't know. There are very rare institutions. There are no institutions that give you that consistent weekly support as religious institutions, but perhaps it's community events or school. I found most of my friends in school. I feel that school has always been the place where I found more community. So, school can be it. But participating in community events, whatever they may be in your neighborhood, that's I think a very big deal for mental wellness. Um, next one. Next one is to take care of your body. Again, these are things you've heard before. They're not things that you don't know. You know that you should sleep well. You know that you should eat well. You know that you should exercise. But I'm just refreshing our minds and providing some kind of basis to think about these things. So sleep, you should have like 7 hours of sleep, 6 to 8 hours of sleep a day, and sleep is very important because sleep is where all the action happens. We walk through our day and we feel that right now, let's say I'm a student right now. I want to read. I'm reading. I do overnight. I'm reading. Actually, it is not that point of my reading that solidifies my memory. It's when I sleep that my neurons make the connections and store these memories. So if I'm doing it overnight and I'm not sleeping, I might be reading, but it's not really entering because the work is done. My memory work is done when I'm sleeping. But also when I'm sleeping, my body and my brain repair themselves because I'm going through stress. Think about going through the traffic of Lagos and all this stress. It's almost, for me, I think of it like I'm building up toxins in my body. I mean, it's just like building up. Stress is building up. There has to be a way to let this out and to repair all the wear and tear that's happened. And all this happens during sleep. And so when we deprive ourselves of sleep, eventually this is going to have a toll on our mental health. It has a toll on how we feel. We feel more angry. We feel more sad. We have experienced more negative emotions. We are unable to cope with our day-to-day lives. That's how important sleep is. The next thing is eating, the way you eat. And lots of people will try to sell you a particular food or a particular diet. And it's not any particular food that affects your mental health, but it's the pattern of what you eat. So typically, it's not like, I ate one ice cream today, or it's just the general pattern. Actually, it's something that is very interesting and it's at the forefront of science right now. They call it the gut-brain connection. The gut-brain connection. That is, if I open your intestines up, the bacteria that are currently in your intestine are predictive of lots of things that go on in your life. The bacteria that can be found in your intestines are predictive of things like depression, whether you be feeling depressed or anxious. So just the bacteria in your intestine. The bacteria in your intestine predicts things like whether you gain weight, you become fat, or you lose weight. The bacteria in your intestine affects lots of things. They are not just living there, they are bacteria. But you have bacteria in your skin, you have bacteria everywhere. And different people have different kinds of bacteria. In fact, for many diseases now, people have been transplanting what you call sheets, fecal transplants, from people's intestines of healthy people to people who are unhealthy. And the idea is that they are taking the bacteria that exist in that person's gut and putting it in the other person's gut. And this is having very, tremendous effects on people's health. And the point being that the things that you eat over time, they create the conditions in your intestinal tract that creates the environment and determines the kinds of things that will grow there. Because it's like soil. What grows there is different, and the kinds of things that grow in different people's in intestinal tract are different, and it's the patterns of what you eat. So typically we recommend like half of a plate should be fruits and vegetables. Maybe a third of, if you take a plate of food now, half of it should be fruit and vegetables. A third of it should be like cereals and grains, and everything else will be the remaining less than third. But it's not any specific thing that you're eating, it's just the pattern of what you're eating. You can look at diets online and dietary patterns online that are recommended if you want to. So I think that's the amazing thing. To be honest, I don't eat very well. I eat, so it's something I also have to learn about. So I don't eat. I don't stick to good patterns of eating. But yeah, and the third one is exercise. It's recommended that you have about 150 minutes of exercise in a week. That's like 30 minutes of exercise for 5 days. Or you can do it about 150 minutes in total. And when we say exercise, it's intense exercise. How you know that your exercise is intense enough is whether you can sing while you're doing it. So if you are running or you're jogging and you can still sing, your exercise is not intense enough. So If you're doing any activity, whatever it is, when it's so intense that it's hard for you to think, and you know that you're doing. So you have to do 150 minutes in a week. And the thing, like I said, this one thing that I think is very true about exercise specifically is that it's, even though they say 150 minutes, if I'm doing 20 minutes, I'm having good benefits right away. If I'm doing 30 minutes, I'm having good benefits again. So 150 is the ideal, but like I said, there's an S curve. So any little incremental thing I do is having immense benefits on my mental health. The third thing is to do something for fun. This is what we call leisure. Leisure is any activity that you do without expectations. So nobody's paying you to do it. It's not your responsibility to do it. So you can think of singing or rapping, for instance. If I love to rap and I'm just rapping because I want to rap, that's different from me being a rapper as a profession and going about for shows and rapping. There's different. There's an expectation in one. There's no expectation in the other. If I love to dance or read or play soccer, like to play football, there's a difference between doing it professionally and doing it just because I want to. And leisure is very important for your mental health. So a lot of us understand this, that we need to take time off and do things just for ourselves. Take self-care time, but we don't. We go to work maybe 6 times a week. We are busy, and we never have time to take time off for ourselves. But it's very important, and I think that we already intuitively know this. And I'm just trying to remind us that try some time, find the time, to take space out for yourself. And if you are married, if you have a family, maybe do it together as a family. The fourth one is to change your thinking, your behavior, and your environment. Change your thinking, your behavior, and your environment. This is the basis for a whole kind of therapy called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. It is that the way we think, the way affects our behavior, our environment affects our behavior, and it's all interconnected. Okay. The way to think about it is that oftentimes we have what they call schemas. Schemas are a kind of thinking. There are 3 different kinds of thinking. We have conscious thinking, we have automatic thinking, and we have schemas. Schemas are the ways we appreciate the world, the things we think about the world, but they are not obvious. They are underneath, and they manifest themselves in the things we say, the things we think. A good example is people, for instance. If you are driving and you're driving and a driver cuts you off, oftentimes if you are driving and you go and check, you see that it's a woman. Many people feel like, oh, women are bad drivers. Okay, but if you were driving and you saw that it was a man, oftentimes many people will be like, that man is a bad driver. Do you see the subtle difference there? In one case, you generalize this to the whole group. Oh, women are bad drivers. But when the same thing happened and it was a different person, but the man this time, he said that man, maybe insulting, that man is an idiot, or that man is a bad driver. You didn't generalize it. And this is how schemas work. We have an underlying thinking of the way the world works, and it manifests in the way we actually act and behave. And we do this oftentimes with failure and success. If I'm struggling and I write an exam and I pass, I'm just happy, okay, I passed the exam. But if I fail the exam, I internalize it in a way and I magnify it. Oh, I'm a failure. So there's a subtle thing. We magnify our mistakes. If I'm struggling in a relationship, I'm having problems maintaining a relationship, I'll be like, oh, what's the word? Forget the word. But it's like, trying to think of the word. Like tragedy, calamity, I forget the word. Anyway, I make it a big deal, like, oh, I'll never get married. Oh, I'm bad at relationships. But if my relationship is going well, and oftentimes, much of the time, the relationship is going bad, it's going well. It's only sometimes that, we have the big fights. So if the relationship is going well, we just say, in fact, we don't often think about it. But when shit hits the fan, it's like, oh, I'm never going to get married. Oh, that's how it looks like. So we magnify our mistakes and we minimize our successes. And we do this automatically. I said there are 3 types of thinking. This automatic thinking. We think automatically about these things. But there's another one that we can do. That's conscious thinking. It involves, because all these things, they are distortions in our thinking. They're not actually true. The way we think is distorted. So what we need to do is to stand back and analyze the way we are thinking about the world. Stand back and see, what are we saying, what we are thinking. Does it actually correspond to reality? In that picture I gave you about the woman driver and the man driver, the same action happened, and yet we drew different conclusions from them. So that tells us that we need to stand back and look at our thinking and see, are there distortions in the way we are thinking about ourselves? When we say I am a failure, you step back and say, does this prove that I'm a failure, or is it that I failed in this particular task? Because when we talk of success, you say, okay, I passed this exam. So in the same way, when you think of failure, it should be like, oh, I failed this exam. It's specific, not a general global assessment of who you are. And that's a way that we have to stand back, recognize that our thinking is not always corresponding to reality, and conscious thinking, recognize this and adjust our thinking in that way. The second thing is behavior. Behavior is there are certain behaviors that are detrimental to our happiness and our social connections, and we often do them without thinking. A good example I wrote in this slide is failing to show up. People organize, oh, let's go out this evening. I do this too. Let's go out this evening. Let's go on, I don't know, let's go to the club, but I don't know what you want to do. And then at the last minute, you'd be like, oh, this thing is happening, I can't come. You have a pattern of always failing to show up when you're invited to things. And at the end of the day, you realize that people stop inviting you. You stop having friends. You have to identify these behaviors and to change them. The last one is more difficult, is to leave a toxic environment or toxic person. A lot of people can talk about other people's relationships and say, oh, why can't you leave the guy? But it's harder when you're in the relationship to leave toxic environments. So if you can, you should leave a toxic environment. Many people will argue that Nigeria is a toxic environment and it's best to leave if you can. But it's not that easy. It's easier said than done. But to the best of our ability, if you can leave toxic environments, because these negative environments, they have an effect on your mental health. And that's very important for us. Then finally, my startup. I was going to tell you about my startup. So over time, I discovered that I was having the same conversation. So when I talk to a person who is experiencing mental distress, I have the conversation with him, and the person is having a new conversation with me. They have not talked about these things with anybody before, but I find that I've talked about this same thing with different patients before. So it's not new for me, but it's new for the person. So it struck me that we could create a system that can automate these kinds of conversations. Automate these kinds of conversations, to the best of our abilities before reaching out for help and performing mental health assessments. And that's why I built MHappy. MHappy is still, in beta. We haven't launched it yet, but people can sign up. You can sign up online, and so you'll be the first to see it once it's out. So it's a chatbot that acts like a mental health nurse, which kind of job I was doing, having these kinds of conversations and performing mental health assessment. Because a nurse, when they are talking to you, they're having a conversation with you, but what they're really doing is performing a mental health assessment. They're looking at the degree of negative thinking you have, for instance. They're looking at how fast you're talking. They're looking at if you're having any magical thinking, for instance. Some people, when they're having mental breakdowns, they begin to think magically. Like, oh, trying to think of one that can relate. So person feels, oh, I'm Jesus, something like that, something ludicrous like that. And so, but they're just having a conversation with you, and you might not realize it. And that's the idea for the chatbot. And based on those conversations, the chatbot is supposed to do analytics. It's supposed to see over time, see trends in your mood. Are you usually happy on Sundays and sad on Tuesdays? If you use substances, if you smoke cigarettes, if you use cocaine, for instance, what are the patterns in your use, and what are the things that that cause you to use? and all these things. You look over time to see analytics, and these are helpful because you recognize the problem, and that's the first step to solving the problem. The third thing is to connect you with people, because we've talked about how a network of people will support you. And oftentimes it's people who understand you that can support you. If a person doesn't experience the same problems as you, it becomes harder. I'm drinking off a Nigerian example, but like, I don't know, if you live in a very Christian-dominated area, for instance, and you're Muslim, it might be harder for people to relate with you. They don't understand the struggles you're going through. And so oftentimes you find, common cause with people who are like you in a certain sense. That's what MHappy provides. And I think that when it's eventually released, it's going to be a good way to improve your mental health. Finally, if you want to learn more, that's our website, and that's my email. That's all I have. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you so much, Jerry, for this. I really appreciate it. Okay, I have a question anyway,
Sure.
but let me give others.
I didn't
audience
notice
to-
when everybody else
to ask,
joined,
yes.
so I don't know if anybody joined too late and they need me to recap on certain things.
Okay, I guess Latifat.
Yes,
Just
yes,
joined.
I joined late.
Okay.
I really joined late.
Yeah, where was I when you came?
Like the last part.
Oh.
Like I think.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. Yeah. I'll send an infographic to the group at the end of it, and you can just read them. Oh, she's gone. Yeah. Does anybody have questions for me?
Okay, so what you are saying is mental stress is different from mental illness.
Yes.
Alright.
Yes. I'll bring that up. Yeah.
Okay, that's the stress. Okay, it's different from mental illness. So like almost like let me use the word mad. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah, let you try to understand the thing.
Mhm.
So let me use the word mad. So it is a type of mental what?
Yes, it's mental illness. So
Is it stress?
it's mental illness. So people who are generally described as mad, there are different kinds of mental illness. So I can't really tell you what they have. Some people might have schizophrenia. Some people might just be bipolar. I'm not sure. They just might be having a manic phase, but it's mental illness. Yeah. And my point there was that a person can have a diagnosis of mental illness. They have a diagnosis of mental. Many of these people you see running the streets of Nigeria, if they get treatment, they can live and function and experience mental well-being just like anybody else. So, I've worked with a lot of people with mental, illnesses, and they're just like everybody else. You can have conversations with them. They have families, they have children, and they're able to function as long as, the mental illness is kept under control. So a person with mental illness can experience mental well-being. And just like that, a person without mental illness can experience mental well-being too. But the point being that you don't have to have a mental illness to experience mental distress. You can break down even though you don't have a mental illness. And if you have a consistent, continuous breakdown, that could probably lead to a mental illness. But you don't have to have a mental illness to experience mental distress. And a lot of people are dealing with mental distress, and just because they don't have any clinical diagnosis, they're not dealing with it as they should. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, this question too. Now, can we relate you not sleeping properly with mental distress? And that's part one. Part two is, all these motivational speakers, they will come and they sleep 3, 4, 5 hours per day.
Yes.
What is the normal hours for night sleep?
Yeah. So typically you should get between 6 and 8 hours. 7 hours is okay. 6 hours is okay. But 7 is okay. And like I was saying, that sleep is very, very important for your ability to function. If you're sleeping only 3 hours a day, you're unlikely to be as productive as you would. The amount of things you can get done in the rest of the day, if you slept 7 hours, you can get more done. You can be more productive than if you were only sleeping 3 hours. Like I mentioned, that much of the work, the actual work, if you're having a math problem or you're struggling with mathematics or you're trying to learn, much of the consolidation is actually happening when you're asleep. And if you're not sleeping, you become more aggressive. you become more emotional. You're unable to think straight, and these things build up over time. And in fact, you know, if you don't sleep for a long time, you can break down, have a mental illness. So sleep is very important, and you should not try not to sacrifice your sleep for anything. It's not always possible. If I had an exam tomorrow, I'll probably stay up a little bit, but you know, try not to sacrifice your sleep if you can.
Okay, so you not sleeping. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
you not sleeping might lead to mental illness.
Yes. If you don't sleep enough, mental distress comes first, but eventually you can end up with mental illnesses.
So, what part of mental illness? If like someone becomes mad or what?
Yeah. So I'll stay away from the word mad, but there's something called manic episode. It's mania. It's you're hyper. You know, it's usually seen in people who don't sleep a lot, who have not slept for a long time. If a person is manic, typically, they're running about, they're talking to themselves, they're talking very fast paced. Usually, what we do is to give them some kind of thing that will knock them out and get them to sleep. Once they have slept, maybe for 18 hours, 16 hours, and they wake up, they tend to be better. So sometimes people are unable to sleep and they end up being manic, and that's the real thing.
Okay. All right. So lastly is there's one of my, let me call the person my family friend. Our dad had an issue whereby he couldn't sleep. Is there anything like is it medical?
Yeah, sleep can be medical sometimes. So you have to talk to the doctor. There are lots of medications that help people sleep, but it's not always medical. There's something called sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene. There are things that improve your ability to sleep. For instance, we are looking at laptops now. You're looking at phones. The good thing not to do if you want to sleep well is for a few. But it depends. Me, I sleep well, so I don't have to modify my life in this way. But if a person is struggling with sleep issues, they should stop looking at their computers. Like 2 or 3 hours before they go to bed. They should have a sleep routine before they go to bed. The things they do, there are rituals you perform. So like, maybe you eat, you read a book, you do this, and then you sleep. If you have a consistent routine that you do all the time, your body uses that as a trigger to recognize that, okay, it's time to sleep. The lighting where you're sleeping. If you work a night shift, like me, I do sometimes, I work night shifts, then it's harder to sleep in the day than it is to sleep in the night, because the darkness is, it triggers your brain to release certain chemicals that help you sleep. So, you look for dark lightning, or, what do you call that thing that you use to cover your eyes? So you can read about sleep hygiene, and that will help you sleep. But sometimes it's just medical, and no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to sleep, and then you might need some medications. That's something you talk to your doctor about.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Ifyok, I see you here.
Yeah, Tibindu, thank you for this session. Actually, I have a question. Like, it was what Bumi said, this motivational speaker talk that made me remember, that made me realize there's a question I've always been asked. So, I think, okay, so I'm only, like, it's a question and it's like a contribution, and I want to hear your view, kind of. So, people saying that, like, I have doctors, like, telling us that, like, we have to sleep within 6 to 8 hours, at most 8 hours and the like. So that's the normal time. But you see that in these times and days that we have, people will tell you that, you see a billionaire at 35, or you see a millionaire at 35, and when you ask them how they did it, they'll say that, while you guys were sleeping, I was busy working and the likes. That kind of stuff. And these are things they'll be telling younger ones that they are not yet up, and people will start running after what is not chasing them and life. So in this case now, so what would you advise? Like, so people telling me that, while I'm sleeping, while I'm having my 8 hours sleep, I am they are busy on their system working. Even this older way, if I remember when I was in school, my proprietor, my university proprietor told us that that while all of us are sleeping, that if you want to get him, you should call him in the midnight. Doesn't mean that they were sleeping in the day while we were, we were going about our normal work now. We were going to classes. So it means that probably they were sleeping during that time, right? Or because keep thinking, and it's not as if, or maybe probably they are not disclosing everything to us, because how would you be able to function when you said that you are sleeping just 3 hours, or we will assume that you're not sleeping at all, because in this case you said that while everybody is sleeping, you are busy working. So are we going to assume that while we are also working, you are busy sleeping?
Yeah.
So sometimes I think about it a lot, and I was like, okay, so let me see, maybe it's what I'm just thinking. Let me hear other people's, because these people don't dig it down and tell us that, okay, this is what they do, this is how they manage their time, especially their sleeping time. Because when you tell me by the face that, oh, while you are sleeping, I'm working, I would just assume that, so do not sleep for 24 hours. But they're supposed to be able to break it down for us and tell us that, okay, this is how they manage their sleep, this is how they manage their, I think there's not enough awareness about this mental health stuff, because people are really emulating these people, and they will not sleep. And they will not break down. And
to tell you the truth, there have actually been studies that have been done on billionaires to see how much they sleep. And these studies have shown that billionaires sleep more than everybody else. So number one, you see. So billionaires sleep more than.
So why are they lying?
That's number one.
Come again. Come again. They sleep more than anyone.
Yes, studies show
And
that.
I'm starting myself all this
Billionaires sleep more than most people. That's number one. Number two. To be honest, most motivational speakers are not billionaires. Most motivational speakers, their success came from motivational speaking, not from doing anything. It's not like if you see somebody who's trying to sell you maybe investment or crypto, whatever it is, oftentimes their success comes from selling the thing, not from actually doing the thing. And that's something to be aware of. If you actually meet people who are successful at what they do, they sleep. I actually accomplish a lot. I accomplish a lot in my day. I accomplish more than most people in this world. And I sleep a lot too. So sleep when I work. So it's not true. But also we say 8 hours, but we also recognize that as you grow older, the amount of sleep you need diminishes. So as you grow older, you can be doing with 6 to 7. It's okay. But generally 7 hours is a good time. Yeah. You can Google it yourself and see how many hours do billionaires sleep on average. You see that they all sleep very well.
You see, so they've just been like, this is the first. Thank God they are showing you. I even sharing this before, because I just think that. So I just think generally that. So definitely, while we were working during the day, we are putting a lot of things in. But they are just probably just passing or just sleeping during the day, and when I go to sleep normally. So that's when they come up and say, okay, I have time now to do a lot of things. So like there's a whole misrepresentation out there that people just assume that they don't sleep. Like if somebody reads that quote sometimes, somebody listen to some of these billionaires or some of them that say something like this, you'll just be like, these people don't sleep.
I agree.
And me, I'm sleeping, and I don't even have quarter or half of their wealth.
Yeah.
God, it's not well for
to be honest, the secret to accomplishing much oftentimes.
But sincerely,
yeah.
Sincerely, on this sleeping issue, I've been having issue about it actually. Like I'm a field worker, and at the same time I'm a safety officer. Now, whenever we are
sorry, Ibrahim is Scott, so wait for him to come back. But I just wanted to say that the key usually to accomplishing much when you have capital. Hello?
Anytime I'm doing instruction for my workers, I will tell them whenever you are tired, just go and rest. But at the same time, I have targets as an engineer to meet. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Now, my problem is, I'm always having this issue of, a worker coming to me now, Oga, I don't tire, I won't go sleep. Around 2 o'clock. And I have a target to meet in order to deliver that particular project. But this guy really wants to sleep. No other person to do the work. How am I going to cope with that kind of a thing?
Right.
Even me myself, I cannot sleep. Why I also need to take that rest?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
And that was like, Oga, not you tell us anytime we want to sleep. So I stopped telling people to sleep on site.
The truth.
I stopped it.
Yeah. The truth though, that seems like a problem of time management, because it's not in the afternoon.
Are you sure?
Like, shouldn't the person be sleeping at night? So the question would be, what is preventing that person from sleeping at night and then coming in the middle of the day and wanting to sleep? Because if the person is getting a good night's sleep, you wouldn't be you have less need to sleep in the day. So that seems to be
you might be right about that. But under the sun at times, even if I sleep all through the night, and I get to sight, around 2 or 3, if the weather is hot or something, I'll be very tired and exhausted. So you just need to rest at that particular time.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah. So I guess you have to just balance your work and your expectations with reality. Because if a worker is sick, you give him time off too. So I think that.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, good evening.
Yeah, often. I think I get that.
How are you?
I'm fine. And how are you, Aziza?
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I just corrected by
Emma Bino. Could you please just brief everything you've said so far, because I just came here, so.
All right, so I said I'll send an infographic to the group shortly. I just gave a distinction between mental illness and mental health and mental wellness, and I argued that it's possible to have a mental illness and still live a full, fulfilling life and be mentally well.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's possible to not have a mental illness and still experience a lot of mental distress. And then I gave 5 tips for improving your mental health. The first one was to get involved in your community, that you're more likely to find happiness if you pursue the happiness of other people. If you're trying to make other people happy, you are more likely to be happy that way than to pursue your own happiness. The second thing was you should take care of your body, and we talked about sleep, we talked about exercise, we talked about eating, what you eat, and we talked about that there's a gut-brain connection. What you eat affects the way you feel, but also that you should sleep well, at least 6 to 8 hours a day, and exercise at about 150 minutes a week. That exercise is an S curve, so you don't have. If you do 150 minutes a week, that's good and that's the best. But doing like 30 minutes is still good for your mental health. So 20 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you can do. And we talked about taking time for leisure, taking time for yourself out of your busy time, making a conscious effort to make time for yourself, and talked about changing your thinking. There are different kinds of thinking. There's conscious thinking, automatic thinking, and there are things we call schemas. These are things that we are not conscious of them, but they affect the way we think, the way we behave. And we have negative. We magnify our mistakes and our struggles, and then we minimize our success. So if you succeed at an exam, you say, "Oh, I passed this exam." But if you fail, you say, "Oh, I'm a failure." So you globalize it rather than be as specific as you were when you succeeded. And then I talked about my startup, MHappy. MHappy is coming out very soon, so you just look out for it.